All right, let's dive right in. I want you to picture this. You're in World War II, and you need to get a tank behind enemy lines by putting it on an airplane. Sounds impossible, right? Well, that was a real engineering challenge, and today we're looking at two very different answers to that one huge problem. So here's the core puzzle. A tank is heavy armor and a big gun. An airplane? Well, it needs to be light to even get off the ground. How in the world do you get those two things to work together? The mission was to build a fighting machine that could be hauled into battle by a glider, but without giving up everything that actually makes a tank a tank. And here they are. These were the two main solutions. Up top, we've got the American M22 Locust, and below it, the British Tetrarch Mk1. And you don't have to be a tank expert to see just how different they are. One looks like a classic tank that's been on a serious diet, while the other almost looks like an armored car that decided to sprout some tracks. This is it. One problem, two nations. Two totally different ways of thinking.
Okay, so let's get to know our contenders a little better. Because these vehicles, they're more than just hunks of metal. They really are a window into how each country approached engineering and even warfare itself.
First up, the American M22 Locust. The design philosophy here is pretty easy to see. Take what you know works and just shrink it. It looks exactly like you'd imagine an airborne tank would look, a classic track design, just made incredibly tiny and compact to squeeze inside a glider.
And now for the British Tetrarch M1. This is where things get a little weird, but in a fascinating way. It just doesn't look like a conventional tank. The first thing you notice are those huge road wheels. It's a completely different idea, one that seems to be all about speed and maneuverability. All right, let's kick off our comparison where it really matters for a tank, firepower. What were these things actually supposed to do once they finally hit the ground?
So the Locust had a 37mm M6 gun, which was a solid little anti-tank weapon for its size. The Tetrarch, on the other hand, carried the British 2-pounder, which is roughly a 40mm gun. So on paper, they're pretty close. But here's the real kicker, the secondary weapon. The Tetrarch also has a coaxial machine gun. That means it's mounted right next to the main cannon, perfect for dealing with infantry. The Locust, well, it didn't have one at all. Big difference.
And you can really see that choice reflected in the turret designs. The Locust turret is super tiny, basically just big enough to house that one main gun. But the Tetrarch's turret, it had to be designed to fit both the 2-pounder and that machine gun, giving its crew way more options on the battlefield.
Having a good gun is one thing, but how did these tanks actually move? I mean, getting them to the battle was just half the challenge. And believe me, when we start looking at how they moved, the designs could not be more different.
The Locust went with a compact Lycoming engine and a vertical volute spring suspension, or VVSS. If that sounds familiar, it should. It's the same super reliable, proven system used on the famous M4 Sherman tank, so very conventional. The Tetrarch, though, it went with something way more radical, the Christie-style suspension.
So what is a Christie suspension? It was this really innovative design that used huge road wheels with a ton of spring travel, giving it fantastic speed over rough terrain. And if you're a tank buff, you know this is the legendary system that became the basis for the Soviet BT tanks and, eventually, the T-34. It was all about performance and high speed.
And you can see the difference right here. Look at the Locust setup. That's the classic VVS, with all its small road wheels packed together. Now compare that to the Tetrarch. It's just dominated by those 4 massive steerable road wheels. This shows you the British weren't just trying to build a smaller tank. They were chasing pure raw speed.
All this hardware is cool, but a tank is just a metal box without a crew. So, where did the soldiers actually fit inside these things? And how did all these design choices affect them? Well, the M22 Locust went for an ultra-compact layout. It basically packed the entire crew in there together, all crammed into the hull and turret. The Tetrarch, though, took a different approach. It put its driver in a totally separate compartment at the front, away from the rest of the crew who were back in the turret. You can really see the trade-offs here. In the Locust, the crew is all packed together. That's probably great for communication, but it must have been unbelievably cramped. Meanwhile, the Tetrarch's driver is all alone up front. Maybe that made coordinating a little harder, but it gave him his own dedicated space to focus on driving that unique, high-speed machine.
So after all that, which tank was actually better? Well, you know, it's not really that simple. This isn't a story with a clear winner and a loser. What we really have here are two completely different philosophies for how to solve the same, seemingly impossible problem.
You see, the American Locust represents a philosophy of miniaturization. Let's take a proven, reliable design and just make it as small and as light as we possibly can.
The British Tetrarch, however, embodies a philosophy of innovation. Let's risk it all on a radical new design to try and get a game-changing edge in speed and mobility.
And that really leaves us with a timeless question, doesn't it? When you're faced with a totally new challenge, what's the smarter bet? Do you go with the reliability of a proven design, or do you chase the potential of a radical innovation? Do you play it safe, or do you take a massive leap of faith? It's a debate that's still going on in engineering and military planning to this very day.